When you grow old, silently cut off 5 types of people. There comes a time in life when clarity replaces confusion, the noise of youth fades, and what truly matters becomes undeniable. As we grow older, our energy becomes more precious than ever, no longer something to waste on meaningless battles or draining people. Yet many of us still hold on to relationships that steal our joy, disrupt our peace, and quietly erode our well-being. Have you ever felt inexplicably exhausted after a conversation, or noticed that certain people leave you feeling unappreciated, unseen, or even disrespected? These are not coincidences. Some relationships act like heavy anchors, dragging us down, keeping us from the freedom we deserve in our golden years. This is not about bitterness or resentment. It's about wisdom. The wisdom to recognize that life is too short to entertain negativity, manipulation, or rivalry. Today we will uncover 5 types of people you must silently cut off for the sake of your peace, health, and happiness. If you want to live these years with grace and fulfillment, stay with me until the end. And if this resonates with you, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because your time, your energy, and your happiness are worth protecting. 1. The constantly negative, the weight of shadows. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "If you correct your mind, the rest of your life will fall into place." In other words, our inner world shapes our outer reality. If we surround ourselves with darkness, our own light begins to dim. History gives us countless examples of how negativity, when left unchecked, can erode even the strongest of souls. One such story comes from the Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor, faced constant criticism and political betrayal. Yet, in his meditations, he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He knew that dwelling in the company of bitter, resentful people would cloud his judgment and corrode his spirit. Instead of engaging with the negativity around him, he chose to focus on wisdom, discipline, and inner peace. Now, let me share a story of my own, a tale from my life, shaped by years of hard-earned lessons. There was a time when I believed loyalty meant standing by people no matter what. I thought friendship was about weathering every storm together, even when that storm was one they created themselves. For years I had a friend named Walter. We had known each other since we were young men, starting our lives with dreams of success and adventure. He was sharp, well-read, and could talk about history and politics for hours. But as the years went by, I noticed something. Walter never had a kind word to say about anything. To him, the world was always on the brink of collapse. If someone succeeded, it was because they had cheated. If someone was happy, they were blind to reality. If I shared good news, a new grandchild, a family vacation, a quiet morning spent fishing, Walter always had a way of souring it. "Must be nice," he'd say, shaking his head. "Some of us aren't so lucky." At first I excused it. Maybe he was going through hard times. Maybe he just needed someone to listen. But years passed and nothing changed. His presence became like a slow poison. Conversations that should have left me feeling enriched instead left me drained. Even when I wasn't with him, his words echoed in my mind, casting shadows over my own joy. One evening, after yet another bitter conversation over coffee, I came home feeling unusually heavy. My wife, who had listened to me vent about Walter for years, simply said, "Do you notice how you always seem tired after seeing him?" I did, and for the first time I let myself admit the truth. Walter was not a friend, he was a weight. That night I remembered a story my grandfather told me when I was a boy. He spoke of a traveler who carried a bag of stones everywhere he went. Each stone, he said, was a grievance, a past hurt, a regret, a bitterness held onto too long. The man refused to put the bag down, believing that dropping even one stone meant surrendering. But as the years passed, the weight of the bag broke his back, leaving him unable to move forward. You cannot walk freely toward the future if you are carrying the weight of the past. My grandfather had said, I had carried Walter's stones for far too long. The next time Walter called, I let it ring. When he sent messages, I responded politely but distantly. Slowly I stepped back. I did not make a grand announcement. I did not try to change him. I simply let go. Something remarkable happened. Without that weight, I felt lighter. The simple joys of life, my morning walks, the laughter of my grandchildren, the quiet moments of reflection became clearer, untainted by someone else's bitterness. Did I feel guilty? At first. But then I realized we do not owe anyone the right to pollute our minds. If there is one thing life has taught me, it's this. Negativity is not just an attitude, it is an infection. It spreads, seeping into the corners of our hearts, turning joy into doubt, hope into cynicism. And if we are not careful, we will wake up one day and realize we have become just like those we once tried to help. Some people are committed to their misery. They wear it like a badge of honor, refusing to see the beauty in life. You cannot save them, and more importantly, you should not let them steal your light in the process. As we grow older, our energy becomes our most precious asset. Every moment we spend is an investment, so why waste it on someone who only brings darkness? Letting go does not mean you hate them. It does not mean you wish them harm. It simply means you choose peace. You choose joy. You choose yourself. Now, I ask you, do you have a Walter in your life? Someone whose presence leaves you feeling heavy rather than uplifted? Take a moment to reflect. Think about the last time you spent time with them. Did you leave that conversation feeling inspired or exhausted? Did their words bring clarity or did they plant seeds of doubt? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to let go of someone negative in your life? How did it change you? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's learn from one another, because wisdom is best when shared. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your peace, your happiness, and your energy are worth protecting. 2. The exploiters of kindness, the price of a giving heart. The great Greek philosopher Aristotle once said the greatest virtues are those which are most useful to other persons. Kindness, generosity, and compassion, these are noble qualities that make us human. But even Aristotle warned that virtue, when unchecked, can be exploited. The Buddhist teachings echo a similar truth. The concept of metta, loving kindness, is a cornerstone of wisdom. But even the Buddha taught that kindness should be balanced with discernment. In one story, a kind-hearted monk kept giving away all his food, leaving himself weak and unable to help others. His master told him, "You cannot light the path for others if your own lamp has burned out." History has shown us that generosity without limits leads not to gratitude but to dependency, and sometimes even to betrayal. Let me share with you a story from my own life, a story about the cost of an open hand and the lesson I learned too late. If there's one thing my mother taught me, it was this: always help those in need. And I did. My entire life I believed that kindness was my duty, and then I met James. James was the kind of man who knew how to tell a story. He had charm, a warm smile, and a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world. We met through mutual friends, and over time, he became like a younger brother to me. At first, it was small things. He needed a ride somewhere, he was short on cash for lunch, he had fallen behind on bills. His stories always had a tragic twist: bad luck, an unfair boss, a dishonest business partner. And each time, I helped. I told myself it was the right thing to do, but something started to change. I began to notice that when I needed a favor, James was suddenly unavailable. When I was dealing with my own struggles, he had no time to listen. The more I gave, the less he respected me. I brushed it off. I told myself, he's just going through a rough time. But deep down I felt it, that growing sense of unease, that feeling of being used. And then came the moment that opened my eyes. It was the dead of winter. My car had broken down, and I called James, asking if he could give me a ride to the mechanic. It wasn't a big ask, just a short drive. His response? "Ah, man, I would, but I'm really busy right now. Hope you figure it out." That was it. No apology, no offer to help later, just an effortless dismissal. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. And for the first time, I saw the truth. James was not my friend. He was an opportunist. I remembered something my grandfather used to say: "A well that gives water to all will one day run dry." I had given, and when I finally needed something in return, I was left empty. That night I made a decision. I stopped calling James. I stopped offering help before he even asked. And slowly, like mist fading in the morning sun, he disappeared from my life. It's a painful truth, but some people don't see kindness as a virtue. They see it as a weakness. They do not appreciate generosity, they expect it. And the more you give, the less they value you. If I could go back in time, I would tell my younger self, not everyone deserves your kindness. I would tell him that kindness without boundaries is not kindness at all, it is self-neglect. I would tell him that true friendship is about balance. If someone only takes but never gives, if they disappear when you need them most, then they are not a friend. They are a burden, and burdens are not something we should carry in our golden years. Now I ask you, have you ever had a James in your life? Someone who took and took, but never gave back? Think about the people in your life today. When was the last time they were there for you? When was the last time they checked in, not because they needed something but because they cared? Your kindness is a gift, not an obligation. Choose wisely who you share it with. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to step away from someone who exploited your generosity? How did it change you? Share your story in the comments below. Let's learn from one another, because wisdom is best when shared. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because protecting your kindness means protecting yourself. 3. The disrespectful. The price of tolerating disregard. Confucius once said, "Respect yourself and others will respect you." His words remind us that we set the standard for how we are treated. If we tolerate disrespect, we invite more of it. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "He who does not respect his own time will find it wasted by those who do not value him." History has shown us that those who fail to demand respect are often the first to be dismissed. Now let me tell you a story about a lesson learned too late, and the price of allowing disrespect to linger. I remember the moment I realized I had allowed myself to be diminished. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day meant for rest and reflection. My daughter and her husband had invited me over for lunch. I arrived, feeling the warmth of the sun on my back, looking forward to good food and good conversation, but as the afternoon went on, something became painfully clear. I was not really there, not in the way that mattered. Whenever I spoke, I was interrupted. When I offered a thought, it was dismissed with a casual, "Dad, you just don't get it." If I shared a memory, it was brushed aside as if it held no relevance to the world today. I sat at that table, listening to their chatter, feeling like a ghost in my own family. It wasn't the first time. For years, I had let moments like these pass. Friends who spoke over me, never truly listening. Relatives who only called when they needed something but never cared to ask how I was. A society that sometimes looks at older people as if we are burdens instead of bearers of wisdom. And I had allowed it, but that Sunday afternoon something inside me shifted. I thought of my father, a proud man who had worked his whole life, who had carried himself with quiet dignity. He once told me, "People will treat you how you allow them to, demand respect or be forgotten." I had been waiting for people to value me, instead of valuing myself first. So I made a decision. That afternoon as I left my daughter's house, I did not slam the door. I did not demand an apology or start an argument. I simply stepped back. I stopped reaching out to those who ignored me. I no longer tolerated conversations where my words carried no weight. I began to prioritize the people who truly listened, who saw me, not as someone fading into the background but as someone still worth knowing. And the most amazing thing happened? I felt lighter. The disappointment, the resentment, it faded, because I was no longer fighting for space in the lives of those who didn't appreciate me. There is a harsh truth that comes with age. Not everyone will value you. Some will dismiss your wisdom, believing that time has made you irrelevant. Some will ignore your boundaries, assuming that kindness means unlimited tolerance. And some will treat you as if you are nothing more than an afterthought. But here is what I have learned. You do not have to stay where you are not respected. Talking away is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the wisdom to understand that you are still here, still worthy, still whole. It is the wisdom to know that time is too short to spend it with people who refuse to see you. And most of all, it is the wisdom to recognize that respect is not something you should beg for. It is something you should expect without question, without compromise. Now, I ask you, have you ever felt invisible in the presence of others? Have you ever tolerated conversations where your voice was ignored, where your presence was taken for granted? Take a moment. Reflect on the people in your life. Do they listen, or do they simply wait for their turn to speak? Do they value your experiences, or do they dismiss them as outdated? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who failed to respect you? How did it change you? Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind each other that respect is not a privilege, it is a right. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because in this stage of life we must surround ourselves with those who lift us up, not those who push us aside. 4. The energy vampires, the silent thieves of the soul. The great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "Care about what other people think, and you will always be their prisoner." His words remind us that when we allow the wrong people to consume our time, emotions, and energy, we become trapped, no longer living for ourselves, but constantly catering to the demands of others. In ancient Rome, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus also warned, "If someone is causing you stress, ask yourself, is it worth the cost of my peace?" Because in the end, what we give away, our time, our presence, our care, should be invested wisely. But not everyone sees energy as something to be valued. Some take and never give back. And if we are not careful, we wake up one day, exhausted, wondering where all our strength has gone. Let me share a story, a lesson I learned the hard way. I once had a friend named Roger. Well, I thought he was a friend. Roger was the kind of person who always had something going wrong in his life. His troubles were never small. There was always a crisis, a betrayal, a terrible injustice that only he seemed to suffer. And every time I was there, I listened to his endless problems. I offered advice. I loaned him money when he needed it. I canceled my own plans when he wanted to talk. I thought I was being a good friend, being there, always, no matter what. But then I started noticing something. Whenever I had a problem, Roger was nowhere to be found. If I called, he was too busy. If I tried to talk about my struggles, he would somehow turn the conversation back to himself. I realized that our friendship was not really a friendship at all. It was a one-way street. And I was the only one doing the walking. The final straw came on my birthday. It wasn't a big celebration, just a quiet dinner with a few close friends. Roger arrived late, in a bad mood, and instead of wishing me well, he immediately launched into another one of his endless complaints. That night, as I sat there, listening to him go on about how life had wronged him yet again, something inside me snapped. I looked around the table. My true friends were laughing, enjoying the evening, and there I was, stuck in the same loop of Roger's self-inflicted misery. For the first time, I asked myself, why am I still here? I remembered something my father once told me: if a well never fills back up, stop drawing from it. I had been giving and giving and giving to someone who never intended to give back. That night I made my decision. I stopped answering Roger's calls right away, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I didn't need to announce it or explain myself. I just quietly let the relationship fade, and do you know what happened? Nothing. Roger never asked why I disappeared. He never reached out to check on me, because to people like him, friends aren't people, they're resources, and once a resource is gone, they simply move on to the next. There is something we learn as we grow older. Our energy is precious, and the wrong people will drain us dry if we let them. Some people believe it is their right to consume your time, your emotions, your attention, without ever giving anything in return. But true relationships should not leave you feeling empty. They should fill you up. If every conversation with someone leaves you exhausted, if their presence feels like a burden instead of a blessing, then you have a choice to make. Let them go. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with the quiet understanding that your peace is worth more. Because the moment you step away from energy vampires, something amazing happens. You find yourself lighter, your mind clears, you feel stronger. You finally have the energy to focus on the things and the people that truly matter. Now, I ask you, have you ever known an energy vampire? Someone who took everything from you but never gave anything in return? Think about it. Are there people in your life who drain you rather than uplift you? Do you feel better after talking to them, or worse? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to walk away from someone like Roger? How did it change you? Share your experience in the comments below. Because wisdom is best when shared, and if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because your energy is sacred and protecting it is the greatest gift you can give yourself. 5. The competitor, the rivalry that was never meant to be. The great Roman philosopher Seneca once wrote, It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. He understood that comparison is a bottomless pit. Those who see life as a competition never find peace. In ancient Greece, Aesop's fables tell the story of the dog and his reflection. A dog carrying a bone sees his reflection in the water, thinking another dog has a bigger piece. In his greed, he opens his mouth to snatch it, only to lose his own bone in the process. Envy and rivalry blind us to what we already have, causing us to lose the very things that make life meaningful. But some people never learn this lesson. Some people don't see your success as something to celebrate. They see it as something to outdo, and if you're not careful, they'll turn your life into a silent battlefield, where friendship becomes a competition and joy is slowly replaced by resentment. I learned this the hard way. Let me tell you my story. His name was Samuel, and for a long time I thought he was my best friend. We met in our 20s, back when we were both struggling to make something of ourselves. We worked hard, built our families, and weathered life's storms side by side. Or at least, that's what I thought. At first, I didn't notice it. If I bought a new car, Samuel would suddenly upgrade his. If I planned a vacation, he would tell me about the better place he was going. If I shared good news, maybe my son got a promotion or I had finally paid off my house, Samuel would immediately follow with, "That's great, guess what happened to me?" And then of course his story would always be bigger, grander, more impressive. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, wasn't friendly competition normal? But over time the pattern became impossible to ignore. The worst moment came when my wife and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. My children had planned a beautiful dinner for us, something simple, heartfelt, and full of love. I told Samuel about it, expecting him to be happy for me. 2 weeks later, he threw his own anniversary party. A lavish event, a big hall, hundreds of guests, even though his marriage was 5 years younger than mine. He barely spoke to me that night, too busy playing host, too busy making sure his celebration outshined mine. That was when it hit me. Samuel wasn't my friend. He was my competitor. Every moment I had shared with him, every laugh, every victory, every struggle, I had thought we were building something together. But to him we had never been side by side. He had always been one step behind, waiting for the moment to race ahead. And suddenly I felt tired. I had spent decades with someone who didn't truly see me, only what I had, and what he thought he deserved more. That night I made a decision. I did not confront him. I did not argue. I simply stopped playing the game. I stopped telling him about my successes, and in doing so I realized something. Without my stories to compete with, Samuel had nothing left to say. Over time, our conversations became shorter. His calls became less frequent. Until one day he simply faded into the background, another face in the past, another lesson learned. I look back now and wonder how much joy I lost trying to make a competitor into a friend. And the truth is, life should not be a competition. A true friend sees your success and claps for you, not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to. But the ones who only show up to compare, they don't want to celebrate with you, they want to outshine you. And here's the thing, you don't have to keep them around. Not every person you meet is meant to walk with you forever. Some people come into your life as lessons, reminders of what you will not tolerate. And when you let them go, something amazing happens. You stop looking over your shoulder. You stop second-guessing your victories. You start living for yourself, not for someone else's scoreboard. You begin to understand that the only person you need to be better than is the person you were yesterday. Now I ask you, have you ever had a Samuel in your life? Someone who turned every success into a competition? Someone who made you feel like your victories weren't worth celebrating unless they could outdo them? If so, take a moment. Reflect. Ask yourself, why am I still playing their game? Life is too short to surround yourself with rivals. Choose friends instead. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever walked away from a competitor? How did it change your life? Share your experience in the comments below, because wisdom is best when shared. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because life isn't a race, and it's time we start living it that way. Peace, true peace, is not given to us. It is something we must create, something we must protect. As we grow older, we come to understand that peace is not just the absence of conflict but the presence of harmony. the quiet assurance that our time is being spent wisely, with people who uplift rather than drain us. Letting go of toxic relationships isn't about anger or resentment. It's about wisdom. Wisdom to know that not every connection is meant to last. Wisdom to understand that walking away is sometimes the kindest thing we can do, not just for ourselves, but for them as well. Because when we choose peace, we choose life. We choose to invest our energy into relationships that nourish us, experiences that bring us joy, and moments that truly matter. And in doing so, we give ourselves the gift of freedom, the freedom to live without the weight of unnecessary burdens, without the heaviness of resentment, without the exhaustion of one-sided relationships. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to step away from someone for the sake of your peace? How did it change you? Share your experience in the comments below, because wisdom grows when we share it. And if this message resonated with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the journey to peace is one we all deserve to take, and no one should walk it alone.